Bob, welcome to the show.
Pleased to be here.
Well, I'm excited now because it's not often that I get to have someone on who gets it. I get some people like that, but also have the, as they say today, have the receipts to back it all up. And I had a great conversation with Shelby still, and now I have you, kind of the leader of us 1776 Unites people. And you're on to talk about your book, but let's set the stage first. I want to talk about the civil rights movement. You did a lot, being active in that movement, leaving there, joining the NAACP, being part of the Urban League. So it's not like you were, and it's like most people of that age, you knew that there was a problem and you were fighting against um, some injustices that people were facing. And it was immoral and you needed something, thought we needed to do something about it. So can you talk about that a little bit and talk about why there's such a difference and these people are wrong saying that basically acting as if we're going through the same things now?
Yeah, I was, as I said, born during the Depression, and I dropped out of high school when I was 17, single parent household, which means my dad died in those days. That's when you became single parents, when your father dies. And but therefore I rely a lot on my peers, and there were just 7 guys who I was close to. One of them you may know was Gordon on Sesame Street, Matt Robinson. Mm-hmm. He was the guy with the big fro.
Right.
He's Holly Robinson's father, mm-hmm. the actress who's married to Rodney Peake. But yep. Long story short, I went into the military at 17, finished my GED, and was stationed in the Deep South in Mississippi and Florida doing segregation. So a lot of the problems that were in deep colored signs, I experienced it directly. And it was really nasty. You were more afraid of the police than you were the Klan when you left the military base. So I had a chance to see racism up close and personal. And when I got out of the military and went to college, went to Cheney State, and I got involved in the civil rights movement after I graduated from graduate school, University of Penn. I lived in Baird Rustin's hometown of Westchester, Pennsylvania. So Baird would come through with Dr. King and support all of the local leaders for their local issues, because King and Rustin would bring the press, and then we had a chance to focus on local issues. Mm-hmm. Well, long story short, I parted company with the movement at that time over the issue of forced busing for integration. I was against forced busing for integration because I believe the opposite of segregation is desegregation, it's not integration. Because if you argue something is all black, it's all bad, then that to me is racist. And so they said to me, the other leaders, well, Bob, your position is consistent with that of the Klan and the Civil Rights and the John Birch Society. And I said, but because Hitler likes classical music, am I supposed to not like it? I said, 2 people can like the same thing for different reasons and be different. Right. But I also left the movement when we were picketing outside of Wyatt Laboratories, a local pharmaceutical company, to desegregate their workforce. Well, they hired 9 Black PhD chemists. And when we asked these brothers and sisters to join our movement, they said they got these jobs because they were qualified, not because of the sacrifices of people who were janitors, hairdressers, and factory workers. So I realized that a lot of people who suffered and sacrificed most did not benefit from the change. So I left the movement and worked on behalf of low-income people of all races. But then the civil rights movement, when they switched and became Democratic elected officials, and then $20 trillion from the poverty program started to flow, and they began to administer those dollars, I saw a huge split in the Black community that continues to this day. That the $20 trillion that we've spent on poverty programs, 70 cents of it goes to the professionals who serve the poor. So we created a commodity out of poor people that extended from then until now. And so I spent my time going out and working on behalf of low-income people of all races, that the biggest challenge we face is class when it comes to disadvantage. And so that's why I worked for the Urban League for 5 years. People don't realize Nixon gave the Urban League $93 million. That's about $500 million in today's dollars to address poverty. Ford Foundation, Rockefeller, all of them contribute. You should, and I worked inside the last 3 years of it, and there is no trace almost at all of what impact that had, other than line the pockets of middle-class Black professional service providers to the poor. And so that has set me on a course. So I left the Urban League after 5 years and went to the American Enterprise Institute, because there I was able, but I've always established solid connections with low-income leaders of all races around the country. And for the past 40 years, we are now connected to 2,500 low-income leaders in 39 states, and they represent a solid block of supporters that defines the Woodson Center.
Wow. That just made me regret not having you for an hour and a half so I can do the whole show, because I can't even go to where I wanted to go next with that, because there was so much there. Basically, when you talked about your shift in your break from the movement, what I heard was, just somebody looking at things from a logical standpoint. You're not doing this saying, I have something against you, or we have a different means to an end. Or I don't think that we want the same results. It's like, what works, and that's why I'm always about solutions. So you can have good intentions, but who really cares about your intentions outside of today? Because that's all they care about. But I don't care about your intentions. If your intentions are to help and you're hurting, guess what? You're hurting. And your piece about the integration is interesting, because you don't hear a lot of voices about it now. And you had a few back then. You felt that way, Malcolm X and some others. But I would always say, and I hear some people say, well, what it was doing really, in addition to what you were saying, it's not necessarily improving the matters, because the integration is going one way. So what you're really doing is, you're not saying, let's make things fair for everybody. You said, let's take some Black kids and drop them in a white environment. Right. And your piece about the race is so important, because I say that all the time. Is a lot of Black people, when you talk about racism, and a lot on the left would say Blacks can't be racist. You say, sure you are. Let me show you some clips of some Black people saying bad things about white people. I say, no, that's not my example of Blacks being racist. Here's my example. When Blacks use whites as the measuring sticks. So when they say things like, you talk about these people always attacking Black people for being on welfare, more white people are on welfare too. What I hear is, look, even the wonderful whites are on welfare. So if they're on welfare, it must be okay for us to be on welfare, because they're great. So when Blacks put whites up on pedestals and then tear them down, they're being racist against Blacks by assuming that there is some, as they say, supremacy there that is unfounded.
Absolutely, but what I have been preaching to people, that I'm interested in creating islands of excellence. I want to see examples of principles that elevate people. So I have worked closely with gang intervention. I can take you into a community 23 years ago that had 53 murders in a 5-Spedbach area because of war and factions, because I worked with a group of 5 ex-offenders who have the trust and confidence of the kids. And they brought those warring factions to my office downtown, just 16 of them. And as a consequence of negotiating a truce, we were able to redirect these young men from being predators to ambassadors of peace. And they began to lead in the restoration of their community as working for the housing authority. And there was not a single gang-related murder in 12 years in the same community that had 53 in 2 years. So, and we took the principles that animated those changes and improvement and exported it to Milwaukee, to other cities. So I have spent my life marketing in and working among those who came in and offered solutions. And we documented these solutions, and Baylor University actually compared 3 of our schools in Milwaukee that had my violence-free zone in it with those who didn't, and they found that dropout rates were down, expulsions were dramatically down, car thefts are up down 65% in areas contiguous with the schools. So for the past years, I have immersed myself in promoting remedies from within those communities where people became agents of their own uplift, and I documented it and sought funding so that we can begin to demonstrate that our destiny and a future of our people is in our own hands, not anything that white people will do or stop doing. And so I can take you to endless examples of creating these islands of moral, spiritual, and economic restoration. Kenilworth Parkside, public housing in Washington, D.C. in the 80s was overrun with drug addicts. They threw the drug dealers out, sent 610 kids to college from one public housing project in 10 years. And they eliminated the teen pregnancy rate, because if you want to impress a young man, you don't dribble a basketball, you carry a book even if you can't read. So it's changing the culture of those communities from within the community itself without white folks' involvement at all. And so this is the message that we should be pervasive throughout.
Right, and I think the key is, I keep going back to solutions. It's not what your intent is, it's the solution. So the problem is, in the past, talking about the civil rights movement in the break, there were people who wanted the same end and they disagreed on how to get there. But now, not only are they not focusing on solutions, but they're also over exaggerating what the problem is or changing it. But you talked about when you brought the people in and you looked at what would work and brought it from within the community. One of the things you mentioned was that expulsion rates went down. And it made me go back to Obama. When Obama looked at expulsion and suspension rates in the schools, and they were disproportionately Black, he didn't say, we should probably look at what this behavior is. Why is it so prevalent in certain areas in the Black community? And let's fix it. What he said was, hell, let's just stop suspending everybody, right? And so that was the solution. So let's just say we don't expel anybody. We loosen the structure that they actually need to get better. We loosen that so fewer people get suspended. And what you have is a school that's chaotic, kids that can't learn because you can't take the element out that's disrupting the class, and it doesn't help anything. But that was their way of solving the problem, not to address why the kids are being suspended and expelled. What we want to do is just say, don't do it, and we think that solves the problem. So I think that what you were doing is obviously more important because it focuses on how to make the change. But let's talk about the other piece, and that's the fact that today people have a kind of blurred sense of their own over-exaggerated, I guess, problems of the Black community. Not that there aren't problems, but the perceived racist and injustices that we're all facing. So you talked about the things that the civil rights movement was trying to fight against. How is that different now? Because if you listen to the activists today, this is Jim Crow all over again. We're facing the same things we were facing then. So talk about some of those things and how they're just totally wrong.
I think one of the most dangerous things you can do, or harmful things you can do, is to convince people that their future depends upon people who hate them, that they've got no responsibility for their own uplift or their own advancement, that all of their problems are external. And so therefore, if my condition is to improve, white people have to change. I mean, that is racist. That's a confession of impotence. It's almost demanding that they treat you like a child. And for instance, Obama's policies made conditions worse for children because it exempt them from any personal responsibility. When you say expulsions, teachers are expelling disproportionately, not because of the behavior, but because they're racist. And therefore, racism is the principal problem, and therefore racism ending it is the principal solution.
And what happens when the white man doesn't change?
Exactly, and that's what's harmful. You know, but we don't ask ourselves, we are disproportionate disparities in the athletic field. Black men are only 6% of the population in the country, but they make up 70 to 80% of the NFL and the NBA. Well, then why do you accept disparity there and say it's individual effort, but we are increasing in when it comes to expulsions, or in the classroom we are non-performing, and you put that on white people?
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do you explain our disparities? When it's positive, it's individual effort. When it's negative, it's racist.
Yeah, you get the best of both worlds. Yeah, you get the best of both.
How do you explain that?
Yeah, exactly. So, and then they say that because of this, everything is, obviously we're going to get to 1776, obviously, and this critical race theory. So what they're saying, and it's amazing how quickly, in a bad way, obviously, like a forest fire, how fast it's spreading. You went from, hey, police are shooting blacks indiscriminately, which is true, to everything that's bad, that happens to anybody who's black is because of racism. And like you said, anything good that happens, you're just lucky. So you create scenarios where I was watching the interview between Anderson Cooper and Tyler Perry. And Tyler Perry, a lot of the stuff he said made sense. It wasn't woke leftist. But then he said something like, yeah, there's still racism. I bought this, I became so rich that I was able to buy the plantation that my family lived on. But he said, imagine how rich I would be if I weren't black, right? So even there, he found a way to sprinkle it on, right? So what we're saying now is that anything happens, you stub your toe, white man, you get fired, white man. So if you say that enough times, doesn't that prepare? And I don't like to be the one who says, we all have different approaches that say it's a victimhood mentality. It's worse than that. It's more like brainwashing. So I personally, and I'm sure you know some people unfortunately like this, I have several friends and family in my circle who are upper middle class blacks, master's degrees, extremely well off, summer homes, the whole nine. And they live a wonderful life. But when you ask them about the BLM movement, critical race theory, racism, they'll say, yeah, it's bad out there. These white people, this, that, the other. And I said, well, when was the last time you were profiled? I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. When was the last time something happened to you personally? So why do you believe that? And they're like, now that I think about it, I don't know why. I can tell you why, because it's everywhere. And if you hear it enough, you believe it. So is it really that blacks, as a large percentage, obviously not everyone, believe that they're victims, or is it that there's a narrative that's being spun and they hear it enough and you just start to believe it changes your reality?
No, I got my wife, she has a lot of friends, and I have a few family members too who are bought into this race narrative. But I really think it is an exotic way of victim signaling. I can continue to ride my Mercedes, and I had a sister, man, this is the God's honest truth. This is a sister, man, who was about in her 70s, can talk about the white man. And she just finished telling me that 50 of her sorrows of just spent a week in Paris celebrating the 70th birthday of one of their friends. And they just got from a week in Paris, 50 of them, telling me how bad the white man is.
Right.
I mean, but it's a way of enjoying your comforts and appearing to be relevant and victim signaling by how angry you are.
Right. Right.
When you have blacks like Robert Smalls, who was a slave, escaped, earned enough money to purchase a plantation on which he was a slave, and took in the family of the destitute slave master, if he could practice radical grace with the people who enslaved him, how could some black with a PhD making six-figure incomes with a victim's book be angrier than Robert Smalls?
Yeah, you know what I say? I always, I draw this line, we always keep playing with the term, is it black, is it African-American, this and that, and I say I'm black, and I say, but there are a group of people who are African-American, I use it kind of as a pejorative, and I say, I draw the line. I said, the biggest problem in the black community are African-Americans, and people look at me like, what do you mean? I say, I'll tell you what, some people struggle, no doubt. Some people have problems, and some of it may be racism, but there's a lot of us who found a way out. We had the magic formula. And what the African Americans do that chaps my hide is they go back. They don't really go back anyway. But if they were to go back to the hood, they would go back and say, instead of saying, look, some people are racist and some things are hard, but I found a way out and let me teach you what that is. There's a formula you can do. You know, not go to prison, not break the law, don't have kids when you're young, do all these kind of things. There are things you can do, but that's not what they tell them. But the African Americans tell them, see, that's what Bob Woodson and Charles Love would tell them. The African Americans say, look, man, it's rough out here because all these white folks are racist. I don't know what to tell you. It's going to be hard to make it. I'm not even sure you do. You can, you might, but if you don't, it's because of racism. It's not your fault. Then they get back in their chauffeur-driven car and they drive away. They're the problem.
And they go into their, they talk about defund the police as they live in a secure neighborhood, or like the founder of Black Lives Matter just moved into a $1.4 million home in a white neighborhood in Los Angeles. And that's one of 3 properties that she has purchased with George Floyd money.
Yeah, yeah.
George Floyd blood money.
Yep.
Breonna Taylor's blood money. But no one wants to say that.
In fact, how many of those people even live in a black neighborhood? When you talk about all the people who talk about, like LeBron says, we're all being hunted. And my joke is, but we know where you live, LeBron. Your address is paid. We know exactly where you live. We can find you on the court. We can find you at your house. But where that house is it in a black community? So all these people who say they're afraid of cops and they're afraid of whites live in a white neighborhood, or, you know, or they're married to a white person.
Including Waters, including Representative. Now, the question is, you know, how do you get a $3 million home on a congressman's salary? But that's another discussion.
That's a whole different story, right?
Yeah, but
yeah. So I think that's
this
the problem.
Is a kind of moral contradiction that we are facing today. But I contend that this continued complaint about whites being responsible, I think it contributes to the black on black crime, because what you're saying to Black Americans is you don't have the capability or the competence or the intelligence or the will to lift yourself up. And therefore, until white people change, I mean, what message of impotence, of self-marginalization, that's what they're sending.
Right. I mean, they tell them that directly. They Don Lemon and the people on CNN, the people on CNN said when George Floyd was killed and people were rioting, it's like, I'm not condoning it, but I understand it. You know, it's like, I get it. You know, so if you keep, and I know to a lot of people with that initial thing, it's like, that was terrible to see. I see what they mean. I'm like, no, think logically, take the emotion out and play it out. When they say, I don't condone it, but I can see why you would do it, I understand it because of emotion, play that out in any other situation, right? If you lost your job and you just went back to the job and punched your boss, nobody would say, but I see why you did it. Right? If something like, you know what I'm saying? Nobody else would do that in any other situation, right? You know, only that. So explain it. So I always question the over exaggerated emotional response to these things. So I never, like, my take on these police shootings is always, and I joke about it all the time. News come up, police shoots black man. I just assume the cop is innocent and he was wearing a Klan hood. I just give them their argument. I said, but I don't know the guy, but I'm supposed to be so personally hurt that I leave work and I take my sign and I go and march. However, we don't say anything about the 60,000 black women who are missing. We don't say anything about and I don't even have to go to black on black crime. We don't say anything about the level of rapes, the number of people out of jail. We don't say anything about child molestation, about women being trafficked. We don't get out and carry a sign and cry on the street corner for that. And that's multiples of people. But if one person gets shot, I am not a responsible and a caring black man if I don't take to the streets and protest because CNN says I understand.
But you see, anytime you generalize about a group and then try to apply remedies to that group, the people on the upper end always benefit at the expense of those at the bottom. For instance, the Me Too movement started in response to a low-income black woman who felt that her peers were being ignored and encouraged them to speak up. So what did rich white and rich black middle class, they took it over and defined the oppression of women is women in Hollywood, you know, have to go to the casting couch in order to get a job. And so therefore, what has been the response? All of the corporations and they need to, I think California requires X number of women on boards of corporations.
Right.
Coca-Cola and other companies are going to hire more female lawyers. What about the 2-hour special that Geraldo Rivera did about rapes of women in our prison system for 2 hours some years ago? He profiled that. Every one of the victimizers was Black. Every one of the victims were Black. And some of these women are becoming impregnated by the guards. But it does not provoke any discussion, and therefore there were not a single remedy discussed to that problem. But still, when you're talking about the women's movement, you're talking about rich, white, and Black or middle-class people, how they're being brutalized. But they don't talk about how the women in these prisons, nothing to this day has ever been written or mentioned about that special that talks about how much of Black women are being villainized in our prison system. Right. And it's true about anytime you generalize about a group, you always provide remedies that helps one at the top at the expense of the others.
Right. And it's the same as even with school. You haven't heard about that in years, but there was an expose a few years ago. I think Cheryl Shakespeare did it. You could look it up, who talked about, now you keep in mind, in most big cities in public schools, 80% are minority students. And there was just a whole series of sexual assaults in public schools. And barely, I think CBS News did an interview with her about it, and she had this whole paper about it, and back, it was more than that though, actually, because I think Bush had put money into a commission to research this stuff and find out what was going on, and it was explosive, and it made the news for like a blip on the radar. Nobody talked about it. Nobody hit the street, and these are children. And just based on the population in public schools, most of them would probably be minority. No, not a sound. Yet, when one person gets shot, the country needs to shut down. So we have lacked all, semblance of logic and context. That's all gone out the way. So let's talk about why we're pushing back against that in the 1776 Unites and what the goals there are.
Well, a lot of this victimization narrative is being encapsulated in 1619. In the year 2019, Nicole Hannah-Jones, a Black journalist at the New York Times magazine section, got together with other Black journalists to write a revisionist history of America that says that America's birth date is 1619, when the first indentured servants or Black slaves appeared on the soils of America. And then she goes on to say that the American economy was based upon slavery, and that as a consequence, the Declaration of Independence is invalid because half of the the founders were slave owners, and therefore all white people are to be blamed and punished, and all white Black people are victims to be compensated.
Right.
So and so therefore reparations is the answer. It doesn't say what kind of nation would that produce.
Right.
It just says these are the problems. Mm-hmm. So what we did at the Woodson Center is we immediately responded by bringing together Black scholars and activists to offer a counter narrative, not a counter argument, but a counter narrative to this history, saying that our birth date is 1776. And then we go on to refute some of the basic arguments that a lot of the problems of out of wedlock births, violence and drugs, overpopulation in prison are associated with the legacy of slavery. This is patently a lie. And in our essays, we talk about, document the fact that after slavery, when white people were at their worst, we were at our best. That our response to slavery and Jim Crow was not to wallow in victimization, but we produced some of the greatest institutions that we built: colleges, universities, medical schools, Black Wall Streets. And so we document our response to oppression was to produce for ourselves. And so we have all kinds of seminars. One quick example, that makes the point between 1930 and 1940, when America was in a depression, the unemployment rate for white America was 25%, ours was 40%. And when racism was enshrined in law and no political representation, our marriage rate was higher than any other group in America. Elderly people could walk safely in our communities without fear of being assaulted by their grandchildren. And so if racism and economic disparity were the principal cause of violence, then why did we go to hell in a handbasket back then?
Right.
It's because of our faith in our Christian faith, our families, and our commitment to self-determination that continued up into the 60s. And it was only after the 60s did poverty get associated with violence and aberrant behavior. I mean, nobody, I can't ever remember sharecroppers rioting or robbing banks.
Right. It's not like we became poor in 1997.
No. I can't remember ever hearing about sharecroppers robbing banks or mugging other sharecroppers' children and raping them. Some reason I don't recall reading about any of that.
Right. So what do we do to solve this? I mean, we obviously are fighting a huge uphill battle. They have, they're pushing CRT and the 1619 Project in schools. They have the media and celebrities on their side to help sell it. Corporations are obviously genuflecting in front of them. They're not going to say anything. So, and then you talk about poverty. Poverty is a problem because now you started off talking about that. We've gone full circle because poverty has become a business. And once it's like anything else, good intentions don't matter. Once it gets to the point that I can make money by talking about how poor you are, Bob, you might stay poor, but I will get rich talking about how it's so sad that you're poor. Then, I don't know. It's like David and Goliath. They're so big. I know my book is coming out soon in pre-order. I had a wonderful blurb in it from Bob Woodson. And, I take it on specifically, both BLM and 1619. And we're doing what we can at 1776 Unites and at other organizations. But what else can we do? I mean, we don't have enough politicians on our side that's willing to speak out against it. What do we do next?
Well, let me tell you what the reason I feel so optimistic. First of all, if you look at the surveys, the radical left says that the police are an extension of white supremacy and therefore should be defunded. 82% of Black surveys believe that we need more police and they should not be defunded. The left says that, and this administration, is that racism is in America's DNA, and now the CDC says it's a national health crisis. 60% of Black surveys did not believe racial discrimination is a principal barrier to their advancement.
Right.
And so what we've got to do is give voices to the majority of Black America to speak out for themselves. Mm-hmm. And so the challenge of 1776 in the Woodson Center is to gather together those Black voices and others who believe in the nation and to find creative ways to provide our own microphone outside of the networks and promote a kind of reformation in the only Black America can save America today.
Right. Now, because I will say
the left builds its moral authority on being the legitimate representatives of the Black community. Well, the way you withdraw that moral authority is give the Black community the vehicles, the means to speak for itself and say, you don't represent us.
Right. Now, what I will add, though, is I think that the Blacks can definitely save their own community and going to be driving that bus to save the country. But who we need to put on that bus is I think that there's a growing number of center-left, and white people who are liberal, but who are like, this has gone too far, and exactly. I may hate Trump and hate GOP. Stem. We got to say, so that's who we have to reach. Like, you talk a lot about Smith College. I interviewed Jody Shaw. I think that out of that and the Heterodox Academy and all those other groups that are popping up specific to college campuses or mom groups, I think those people who are now saying, I sat idly by for a while, but when you start telling my 10-year-old kid that he owes your kid something, or when you start having, people at elite private universities who are Black but are from upper middle class families call out janitors and cafeteria workers as racist because they just pointed out that the room was closed and they're detrimentally affected, we have to say something. So I think they're a really important voice in this movement as well, right?
Well, we are building a multiracial coalition as a part of this pushback. Mm-hmm. But we believe, like the civil rights movement, it should be Black-led,
right,
but participated in by everybody.
Right.
Because they're using the Black community. We think the messengers and the leadership of it should be Black, but we at the Woodson Center in 1776, we're going to reach out to all of those groups you named to say, come into this coalition and help us push back to save this country. But I really think that 85% of the rioters in Minnesota were white.
Yeah.
They are appropriating the rich mantle of the civil rights movement. And when they migrate that to Portland, Oregon, where they're burning Bibles, desecrating the flag, pulling down the statues of Frederick Douglass, I contend Dr. King's statue is next if we aren't careful, because there was a teacher that prevented a student from turning in an essay because he quoted Dr. King, because Dr. King used the word Negro. So white people are now determining for us what is culturally unacceptable.
Yeah, and that's where it's going to go. I do agree. I say often that it's a pendulum and it's got to reach its apex. It's getting closer because all this is accelerated, but when it reaches that, the floodgates will open. But let's finish by talking about your latest book, Lessons from the Least of These. Talk about that for a moment.
Well, for the last 40 plus years, I have walked the streets of our cities and worked next to and in support of hundreds and hundreds of what I call Josephs. In my book, The Triumphs of Joseph, I talk about in Genesis that Joseph of old in the Bible, the most discussed person there, he was unfairly treated all his life, but he never succumbed to bitterness. Locked up in Pharaoh's prison, and then eventually became second only to Pharaoh in power. Even with that, he reached back and helped his brothers who betrayed him and the Egyptians who enslaved him.
Right.
There's an example of radical grace. And so what my book does is that I detail in each chapter what are the principles that underlie and define the resilience, the qualities of resilience. What is it that causes a person born under the worst of circumstances to thrive in the face of it? And I describe 10 principles. Each principle is a chapter with examples of resilience in action. What are the qualities of the Joseph of two types? Those who were in poverty but not of poverty. Those who are raising children in high crime neighborhoods, who are not dropping out of school, they're not in jail, they're on drugs. What is it how they are defined? And those who did succumb to prostitution and predatory behavior, but through God's grace came redeemed. I talked about how to identify those two types of Josephs, and in my book, and I call them lessons from the least of these. The qualities and actions on the part of the least in God's kingdoms, they are the ones who are going to guide us to a promising future.
Wow. You have one great example from the book that you use that you want to give before we go?
Yes, there's one of Leon Watkins, one of my first grassroots leaders who's living in South Central, 62nd and Pico. And the East Side Crips gang was terrorizing his community. And when they start shooting it up, families had to go into their bathroom. But Leon decided he had to do something. So he put wanted posters up all over the community for the leaders of the East Side Crips. And he put a phone number for a local telephone booth. He played games. After 2 weeks, he agreed to meet him in an area in back of his house. They had these huge alleyways where dump trucks come through. He said, I'll meet you at 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock came, they pulled up, strapped down, this gang, and Leon came by himself in a pair of jeans and a t-shirt with his hands up. And so the leader said, I heard you're looking for me. What do you want? He says, I want to talk to you about your life. They sat on a trash can for 2 hours. The next day, he had that young man quake in Bible study. And in 5 days, he had all 20 gang members in Bible study. And the gang transformed from being terrorists to the community to helping in protection and rebuild that community. And I document how Leon accomplished this great feat, armed with only the will of God. So there are a lot of stories in the book of one person armed with the truth and faith in God, how they used that relationship to transform and improve an entire community. He is what we call a Joseph, a healing agent. And I described a lot of how he did it. And to me, it was an amazing examples of grace in action.
Wow, definitely people need to go pick that up. He is Bob Woodson, founder of the Woodson Center, 1776 Unites, and Lessons from the Least of These, among other books. Check that out. Bob, I truly appreciate your time. I'd love to have you back to go more in depth with these things, and I will talk to you later.
And thank you for having me and hosting me.